So I want to address Job today. And there's so many things we could say about Job, so many subject matters that come up in Job. I just want to talk about one, and that's the first two chapters when Job's life gets destroyed and all of his stuff gets wrecked and his family dies. And I just want to show that this is not God's original idea. And it was not God's intention to take his best friend and just hand him over to his worst enemy and say, hey, Satan, see this guy down there? That's Job. Why don't you go destroy his life, kill his family? And Calvinists love that idea because it just demonstrates God's sovereignty. Right? God can do whatever he wants with this creation, and if that means ruining your life, he can do that, which he could, but that's not what happens in Job. So I just want to cover that and take that off the table so that they can't use this against Scripture and God's character anymore. So that's where we're going to go today. And there's a number of controversial things in Job I really don't want to get into. This will be a shorter video. The sons of God, who is that? Are those angels? I think they were, and that leaves other implications for Genesis 6 and some other sections of Scripture as well. We can talk about some other time. Even Satan himself is controversial because in Hebrew, the word for Satan has a definite article before it, and you wouldn't. So basically, in Hebrew, it's read the Satan, which is weird. You don't do that in Hebrew, just like you wouldn't do it in English. I would not say I am the Nick, or my daughter is the Scarlet. You don't talk like that. And that's a whole other subject where it's basically Satan is also, it's a name of the serpent from Genesis 3, but it's also a label. It's also a title. So was that actually in Job? Was it really the serpent from Genesis 3, or is it another demonic force? Maybe like one of his minions, another demon. So that's another conversation topic. Look at, geez, I'm going to get off into the weeds already. Look at Jesus talking to Peter when he says, "Get behind me, Satan." He's talking to Peter. He's not addressing some spiritual demonic force influencing Peter. He's talking to Peter. And the evidence is that when Satan himself enters into Judas, he convinces Judas to betray Jesus so that Jesus would be handed over to his enemies and killed. Satan wants Jesus dead. And what Peter says in this moment is, no, we're not going to let them take you and kill you, which is the opposite of what the serpent wanted. So when Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan," he's talking to Peter because Peter is opposed to Jesus's plan. And the word Satan means accuser, it means adversary, it means opposer. Even in Numbers chapter 22, some of you guys aren't going to like this. The angel of the Lord, which was pre-incarnate Jesus, the second person of the Godhead, he is identified as Satan in Numbers 22, verse 22. He is the angel of the Lord who is an adversary, le Satan, against the Balaam, and when Balaam is set up and his donkey won't pass by the angel. The name in Hebrew is le Satan, and that's talking about the angel of the Lord. So yes, it is the one guy from Genesis 3, but it's also just a label. So that's a whole other subject you can get into, whether or not this is literally the same serpent from Genesis 3 in Job chapter 1 and 2, or if it's just another one of his wicked, evil servants, another demon, another accuser. Because all the demons are accusers. They're all adversaries. And so it could be one of them. I think it still is Satan as we know him. Like John mentions in Revelation 12:9, Revelation 22. He mentions the dragon, serpent, devil, Satan. Those are all the same guy. And even Peter, which I'm going to cover in this episode, 1 Peter chapter 5, he references Job, and he says it's Satan as we know him in the New Testament. But so even if the Hebrew is just referencing that title, well, Satan from Genesis 3 still fills that title, even if they're not identifying him by name, even if this is just saying the adversary, it could still be him. So I think it is, and I'll show you that based on what Peter says. Now for Job, this is one of those times when I wish we had more information than just the text. And what I mean by this is we don't have tone of voice, we don't have facial expression, we don't have body language. All those things would communicate more information than just text by itself. God isn't going, "Satan, where'd you come from?" I think he sees Satan show up and he says, "Where'd you come from, Satan? Like, come on, let's get on with it. What do you want?" And then Satan, I don't think he's bored, like a lot of pastors say, "Oh, I'm just roaming around the earth, going up and down in it, walking to and fro. Like, I got nothing better to do." No, I think Satan has more of an air of arrogance and pride about him. Like, "Oh, where'd I come from? Well, I came from walking around the earth, going up and down in it." Like, he's got like an ace up his sleeve. Like, he's going to pull one over on God this time. I think that's his attitude in this text, even though we don't have the tone of voice, the facial expression, the body language. We don't have those things to help us. We just have the words on paper. So give me 10% interpretation, and I'll prove this with the other 90% from Scripture. John does a great job. If you read through like the Gospel of John, he does a good job at filling in these gaps. When Jesus says, "Destroy the temple and I'll raise it up in 3 days," John fills in the narrative. He says he's talking about his body. And Jesus says, anyone who believes in me, out of his belly will flow rivers of living water. And John fills in the narrative, says he's talking about the Spirit. And Jesus says, the Son of Man must be lifted up like Moses lifted up the serpent. The Son of Man must also be lifted up. And John says, he's talking about the type of death he's going to die. So John does a great job with that. We don't really have that detail in Job. So bear with me. I got to do a little bit of interpretation here, just because we've already been programmed to read it in a different light. The text does not say this was God's idea. The text will not tell you that it was God's plan to introduce Satan to Job. People reading the text have already told us that. And so we're already programmed that direction. So I got to do a little bit of just work here to at least bring us back to a neutral playing field so you can see the text for what the rest of the book of Job shows. So bear with me, okay? I think that was what Satan did. He showed up like with this air of confidence about him, like he's going to pull one over on God this time. And he says, I've been walking around the earth. Like, I know something. And then God is the one first who introduces Job. And this is really all they have to go on, is they say that God is the one that brought up Job's name first in conversation, which to me, that doesn't mean anything. That doesn't mean anything at all. I mean, even Genesis 3 again. God is the one who brings up in conversation the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Adam didn't say anything about it. He didn't say, yeah, we ate from the tree. Adam said, I heard your voice walking in the garden. I heard you coming, so I went to go hide. And I realized I was naked. And then God brought up the tree. God said, who told you you were naked? Did you eat from the tree I told you not to eat from? Question mark. That's what happens here in Job. Is God knows what Satan's up to. He's not stupid. He knows exactly why Satan showed up. And so when he says, Satan, where'd you come from? And Satan says, oh, I come from walking around the earth, going up and down in it. And then God says, basically, he says, oh, you have, huh? Have you considered Job? That there's none like him in all the earth? A perfect and upright man, says no to evil. He fears God. Basically saying, you've considered him, haven't you? And that's why you're here. And now look at the text. I'm going to start actually quoting directly here. Look what the information God gives compared to the information Satan already has. That should tell you something right here. The Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job, that there's none like him in all the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil? So Satan answered the Lord and says, does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him and around his household and around all that he has on every side? You've blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. How does Satan know that information already about Job? That's not what God just said. The information Satan has is different than the information God provided, because Satan did find Job. Satan had found Job, and that's why he goes to God to accuse Job in front of God and in front of the sons of, I'll just call them the sons of God. I won't say they're the heavenly host, just for the sake of, being palatable in this discussion. In front of the sons of God, the Satan decides to accuse God's character and Job's faithfulness. And now I want to go to the other interactions that we have. 4 explicit references in the Old Testament where Satan gets an audience with God. One is in Zechariah 3, one is in Jude chapter 1, verse 9, and then twice in Job, chapters 1 and 2. So in Zechariah 3 and Jude chapter 1, verse 9, Satan shows up and he wants the body of Moses. And the answer that he gets is, no, goodbye. And then he wants the soul of Joshua. And the answer he gets again is, no, goodbye. This time, he's not trying to request anything. And he's not saying, I want Job. He shows up and he says, Job is a fraud and you're playing favorites. Satan doesn't ask for anything. And so the answer he gets is no longer get out of here. Now it's an accusation. It's an attack on God's own character. And so God enters into this conflict because now he can actually strengthen the faith of the sons of God that are witnessing this whole interaction. As far as I can tell, that's what's happening in the scenario here. Because now what happens is God says, okay, all that he has is in your hands. And he basically he takes his hand of protection off of Job, and then Satan is free to afflict Job, at least to the extent where he doesn't kill him, because he says you're not allowed to take his life. So we have the fact that Satan has information about Job that God did not give him, suggesting Satan did find Job already. He knows things about Job. And we also have Genesis 3, and there's other places as well, but this one specifically, Genesis 3, where God introduces the tree of knowledge of good and evil in conversation before Adam did, just so God introducing Job in conversation before Satan brings him up. It doesn't prove anything. Now let me show you Job chapter 2. I'm going to back up so we can put Job 1 and 2 next to each other and see the text. If someone says the text just shows plainly that God did bring up Job first, that God introduced Job to Satan. Anyone says that about the text, they can't answer Job chapter 2, because the words here in chapter 1 and chapter 2, the second conversation, they're identical. Here's Job 1 again. We just read that. Here's Job 2. Another day came when the sons of God came to present themselves. Satan comes along with them. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come from?" And Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth and from walking back and forth in it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in all the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil?" You see this? And we know for certain that Satan does know about Job here in chapter 2 because chapter 1 already happened. So you can't look at chapter 1 and just say, well, the words are clear that Satan didn't know about Job because you're in violation of chapter 2. The words are identical. So if he knows about Job here and the words are written like this, you can't say, well, the words are written like this, therefore he didn't know. You see how the argument from chapter 1, just the words by itself, doesn't hold any water because then you're in violation of the exact same words in chapter 2. Now let me show you more. Let's go to 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8. Peter says, "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour." We just saw that Satan admitted to doing that. He said, "I've been roaming around the earth." And Peter says that's what he does. He roams about the earth looking for someone to devour. Now, also, most people recognize Peter is quoting. He's drawing an allusion to Job. Not as many people recognize he just quoted from Job twice in that one verse. Go to chapter 2 in Job again. We're going to be the same verse, Job 2, verse 3, and look at what God says in reference to the first interaction in Job chapter 1. God says in Job 2, verse 3, he said, "Has you considered my servant Job? There's no like him in all the earth, the blameless, upright guy, and one who fears God and shuns evil." And then he says, "And still he holds fast to his integrity, although you, Satan, you incited me against him to destroy him without a cause." The word destroy is what Peter's quoting. Let me show you this. Now, I'm not going to read Hebrew here. I'm just going to put it on the screen so you guys can see it. Genesis 6:7, when God says he will destroy everything on the earth. The word here is Strong's 4229, and that means to wipe out or to abolish. The same word shows up in Genesis 7:4 when he says, "I'll destroy the earth for 40 days and 40 nights." Another reference for the word destroy is 6:13 in Genesis, and this one here means to bring to ruin. This is not what's said in Job chapter 2, verse 3. Here's Job 2, verse 3. Here's the word. It's Strong's 1104. And this word means to swallow up. Or in other words, like Peter said, devour. So Peter says, your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, which Satan admitted to doing. And Peter says he's looking for someone to devour, which God says Satan tried to do. So Peter's quoting from Job twice. And then, of course, the Calvinists come along. They're like, yeah, but he didn't find anybody. No, he found Job. He found Job. He figured out that God was protecting him, so he couldn't actually afflict him himself. So he goes to accuse Job's character and God's character, Job's faithfulness and God's character, in front of an audience. Now, he's already got angels to follow him. He's already got fallen angels, and there's demons out there. He's already influenced others. So it makes perfect sense to me that he's trying to influence more people by showing that God is unfaithful and he's untrustworthy. And now, something that's really going to make people mad. You recognize what's happening here. God has already identified Job as the most faithful person on earth in his day and age, in his day. And he says, there's none like him in all the earth, and he's faithful to me. That's what God says about Job. And Satan is the mechanism Satan's using to cause the sons of God to lose faith. Satan is employing total depravity. It was Satan's idea. You won't find total depravity in Genesis 3. At no point does it say, oh, and then all of humanity fell into this despair, this covering where their eyes are closed and they can't see the truth and they can't believe the gospel. No, their eyes were opened and they recognized the knowledge between good and evil. They gained knowledge in Genesis 3. They didn't lose anything. Nothing was lost in Genesis 3 as far as their knowledge and their ability goes. What they lost was their immortality because they were kicked out of the garden. They can no longer, they're going to eventually die so that they're not stuck forever in a sinful state anymore. That's what happened. They got kicked out of the garden. They didn't lose the ability to believe, the ability to understand. None of that. But Satan is employing one of the tenets of total depravity. He's saying even the most righteous person on earth, if God didn't play favorites with him, even he wouldn't believe in God. That's total depravity. Total depravity, especially if you read from like the 1700s and 1800s, they use the specific term special grace. That without a special grace, you can't believe the gospel. And that, of course, is regeneration. God needs to regenerate you first, so then you can believe the gospel. This is exactly what Satan's arguing for. He's trying to use total depravity to convince people that nobody on earth would trust in God. Even the most faithful one, even Job, the most faithful guy on earth, would not trust in God if God did not give him a special grace. And that's Satan's argument. And Calvinists have no idea where their doctrine comes from. It comes from Satan. Satan made it up. And Satan failed because when God did take away everything that he gave him, he said, look, all that he has is in your hands. Job kept faith anyway. So Satan's tool of saying that absolutely nobody would believe in God failed. So Calvinism failed 3,000 years ago. When was Job written? 3,500 years ago? I have no idea. 4,000 years ago. Calvinism failed long back then. Back then is when Calvinism failed. Total depravity is wrong. Satan made it up, and he tried to use it as a tool to get the sons of God to distrust in God. And it didn't work. Except, today it works all the time with Calvinists. They all say nobody would believe in God unless God gave them a special grace first. Nobody would believe in God. And they're wrong. In fact, let me mention that really quick. Beginning of next year, I'm going to make several short videos just addressing Calvinist rhetoric. Sheep can't turn into ghosts. It'll be a 5-minute video for that. Sheep don't pick their shepherd. Be a 5 or 6 minute video for that. How come you believed and your neighbor didn't? Maybe that'll be a 6-7 minute video. Just things like that. You can't understand God's grace until you first understand his wrath. That might take that might take 10, 12 minutes because that's just wicked. That is so disgusting. And it is the greatest insult to what Christ did, saying you can't understand what he did for you until you first understand that, how hell functions. And that'll be a longer video, but that's still just rhetoric. If you guys have rhetoric like that, and if you came to faith on your own, then you're giving yourself a reason to boast. And if you guys have other pieces of rhetoric you want just a quick answer for, leave them in the comments or send me an email, and I'm going to answer lots of those beginning of next year with short videos. And so that's coming up. Let me get back to Job. We got more for Job. Notice that Satan left Job's wife alive. This is another reason why I think it's the same guy from Genesis 3. The serpent, who is Satan, it's the same accuser, the same adversary in Job, because this was an old trick of his. God didn't say, oh, spare Job and his wife. God just said, you can't touch Job. You can't take his life. And Satan kills all of Job's family, all of his kids, except his wife. He left his wife alive. That worked once in Genesis. Remember, Satan's talking to Eve, and he got Adam to fall by following Eve. Remember, it says she turned and gave to her husband who was with her. He was right there the whole time. But Satan didn't go after him. He went after her. And through her, he got Adam. And so I think it's the same Satan with the same old tricks going after the wife. And look what happens now in Job chapter 2. His wife shows up. It says, verse 9, says, his wife said to him, do you still hold your integrity? Why don't you just curse God and die? Because that's what Satan was thinking. If I leave her alive, maybe she'll help me make Job fall. But Job didn't fall. Job kept his integrity. And he answers, you speak as one of those foolish women. Should we not accept good from God, and shall we not also accept adversity? And in all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Now remember, Job doesn't know what's happening to him. This is his perception. And we're not doing any violence to the scriptures. It's true, Job said this in conversation. But what he said doesn't have to be accurate. It just needs to be accurately recorded. I'm not violating the scriptures here. And we'll show you that in a minute. Job doesn't know what's going on. In fact, go just, if you want to go, from Job chapter 38 all the way to the end of the book. That's when God shows up and starts talking to Job. And God never tells him, hey, so Satan showed up, we had this conversation, and here's what happened. God never tells him that. God asks 80-something different questions and statements. None of those include the conversation from the beginning of the book. It's not included. So Job is unaware. So to the best of his knowledge, what's happening is happening at the hand of God, even though we already looked at, God told Satan, everything Job has is in your hands. And Satan then went off to afflict Job. We know Satan did this. It's clear for us, being outsiders reading the narrative. It's not clear to Job in the narrative. Then I'll go back to Job chapter 1. Same thing happens here. Job assumes God did everything. It says, Job arose, tore his robe, and shaved his head, and he fell to the ground and worshipped, and he said, naked I came out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job did not sin, nor charge God with wrong. So it would have been a sin to shake your fist and say, how could you do this, God? Kind of like Jonah. Jonah in the chapter 4, that vine, that gourd, grew and gave Jonah shade. And so he's all grateful he's got shade. And then God took the vine away. He sent a worm to take the vine away. And Jonah's furious. He's like, I have every right to be angry at the vine. No, you don't. And God says that the vine showed up without your help and it left without your help. And of course, for Jonah, you still don't care about these people in Nineveh, but you care about the vine. Like something's wrong with your heart, Jonah. But Job didn't do that. He still blessed the name of the Lord, even though he thought it was done, all his affliction was done by God. And again, God can do these things. All I'm saying is he didn't do these things here. That's not what happened here. And so, in fact, I mean, just picture this, okay? Job just lost everything. His whole life is wrecked. His family is destroyed and dead. He's not sitting there thinking, now would be a good time to start teaching accurate theology. No, he's crushed. He's destroyed. He's in great despair. He's emoting. He's telling you what his perception is of what he's going through. Look at Job chapter 13, verse 15. Job says, "Though he slay me, yet I will still trust in him. And then even so, I will defend my own ways. I will keep to my own ways." I mean, if we're going to be good Calvinists and all this is literal and it's all sound theology that Job is teaching, I guess Job was dead, right? I mean, that's what he said. He said, "Though he slay me, I will still trust in him." That solves everything. Job died. In chapter 1, Job died. But no, of course. Of course, they won't do that, okay? It only helps, they only accept the parts that help Calvinism. So if you can read a verse and the literal reading helps Calvinism, then obviously we got to go with that one. And if it's a figurative reading that helps Calvinism, obviously we got to go with that. Can you stop being a Calvinist for 5 seconds and let the text talk? Go back to chapter 1 again. Right here, in the same breath, he said, "The Lord gave, and the Lord is taken away." He also said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will return there." So you telling me Job is under the impression when he dies he's going to go back into the womb? Come on, dude. You're not trying. You have Calvinism in mind. You're committed to Calvinism, so you just look for that in the text. Stop doing that and let the text talk. Job is emoting here. He's telling you what he thinks he's going through. He's not teaching sound theology. That's not his purpose. Now go to chapter 42. I'm going to show you this. I'll start at 38 first. Look at the beginning of 38 when God shows up and he addresses Job. And this ought to just seal the deal that Job is not accurately understanding his scenario. He says lots of great stuff about God in the book. He says incredible things about God. There's good theology in Job. All I'm saying is Job's perception of his scenario is incorrect. Look at the first 3 verses in Job chapter 38. "The Lord answered Job out of a whirlwind and said, 'Who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge?'" What he's saying is basically anyone who's understood you, Job, anyone who's listening to you, is more confused now. They're in further darkness, in more misunderstanding than if they had never heard from you in the first place. You're darkening counsel with these words without knowledge. Now, I've had pastors in the past, years ago, I had pastors who said God first addresses Job's stupid friends with that question. You guys are darkening words of counsel or counsel with words without knowledge. And then he addresses Job and he says, "Now prepare yourself like a man to Job." That's not correct because Job owns it in chapter 42. Job says you were talking to me when you said that. So let me show you that. This is in Job chapter 42, verses 1 through 6. "Job answered the Lord and said, 'I know that you can do everything, and no purpose of yours can be withheld from you. You asked, who is this who hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me which I did not know.'" So Job admits it, says, yes, I was the one who you said, Lord, was uttering words without knowledge. I was darkening this counsel. Job admits it. And the only thing I can say clearly in the whole book of Job was that the thing he got wrong was thinking God did this to him. Because he says tons of stuff about God, which is accurately describing God. He just doesn't accurately describe his own scenario because he doesn't know about it. He doesn't know what's happening on the spiritual side of things. He was not privileged to that information. I mean, how much easier would this have been if he did? He would have been even more faithfully inclined to not be in despair, knowing he was under attack from Satan and God was going to come through in the end. Because he does. God gives him back everything he lost and then some in the end of the book. But he says, after that, after admitting, I did this, I screwed up. He said, "Listen, please, and let me speak. You said, I will question you and you shall answer me. I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes sees you. Therefore I abhor myself and I repent in dust and ashes." That's Job's conclusion, based on what God says, answering him in the end. And it's only after this happens, after Job repents, that God turns to Job's friends and says, "Job hasn't spoken rightly about me, and you guys haven't." After he repents, after he says, "I was wrong, and please forgive me." After that, God says, "Yeah, Job spoke rightly about me, and you guys have not spoken." In fact, he's really angry at Job's friends, Eliphaz and Bildad and all those guys. He says, "I don't even want to hear your prayers. Have Job pray for you. I don't even want your prayers." So God's really mad at them for their influence and their input, their failed input in the scenario. But the whole time, Job is never told. No one ever comes to Job and says, "Hey, there's a conversation that took place between Satan and God, and here's how it went down." No one told him that. We only know because we have the narrative after the fact. And the only thing you can say, if you want to go this far, is to say that God is shouldering responsibility for the events in the book of Job because he did allow it to happen. Ultimately, it was his decision to let Satan afflict Job. That was his decision. Nobody forced him to do that. He chose to do that. So because that was the narrative, the scenario, he does shoulder responsibility for it. Look, even Job 42, verse 11. says all his brothers, all his sisters, and all those who had been his acquaintances before came to him and ate food with him in his house, and they consoled him and comforted him for all the adversity that the Lord has brought upon him. Each one gave him a piece of silver, and each one a ring of gold. So it says there, the Lord brought the adversity upon Job. Let me show you some other references here where the scriptures are written in a particular way. The biblical authors use this type of language to just identify when someone takes responsibility. It does not mean they effectively did this. This one here is in the narrative. It's not a conversation taking place like the other ones where Job is guessing. Let's say that. He's guessing that God did this. This is actually in the narrative for the reader. It says that God brought the adversity upon Job. And this is a common use of biblical language. I got several examples I'm going to show you here, and this will be the last argument for the video, okay? We know already from chapter 1 and chapter 2, it was Satan's idea, and God gave Satan the ability, and Satan went off and did these things. That was happening in chapter 2, and God even says, you were the one who incited me against him. So we know God didn't literally do this. Now let me show you these other examples here, okay? 1 Chronicles 21 verse 1 says Satan was the one who moved David to number the children of Israel. 2 Samuel 24 verse 1 says the Lord moved David to number the children of Israel. Which one is correct? We have a contradiction in Scripture here? No. Satan did it, but God takes responsibility because it happened on his watch, so to speak. David was under his protection, under his provision, and he allowed this to happen. Therefore, God takes responsibility even though Satan did it. You see the difference there? Acts chapter 1 says Judas bought the field that Judas died in. Matthew 27 says the chief priests were the ones who bought the field Judas died in. So again, is this a contradiction? No. Judas was the one who, Judas provided the means for them to buy the field. That's what these texts mean here. Look at John chapter 3. Twice in verse 22 and 26, it says Jesus went to under the river and he was baptizing people. John chapter 4 says Jesus didn't do baptizing for the people. He said he didn't do any of it, the disciples did it. And this should be the clearest one here. This isn't two separate books. This is the same writer, one chapter later. So it's oftentimes you'll see atheists or anti-Christian people who are like Muslims bring up these arguments and they'll say, your Bible's got errors in it, there's contradictions. No, you don't. Do you think John forgot what he just wrote 4 minutes ago? No, he's clearly making a point that Jesus can do something by allowing someone else to do it. Just like God can afflict Job by allowing Job to experience affliction. That's what we see here in Job, right here. Same thing Jesus did. It says Jesus baptized people, but Jesus did not do the baptizing. I got more. Romans 15:15 says Paul wrote Romans. Romans 16:22 says Tertius wrote Romans. See the difference? Acts 2 verse 23, Peter says, you Jews handed Jesus over to be crucified. 13 verses later, verse 36, he says, you Jews crucified him. Well, which was it? This is both. This is the way biblical language works. Exodus 4:21, God says, I will harden Pharaoh's heart. 1 Samuel 6 verse 6 says Pharaoh hardened his own heart. It says a question, it's a rebuke. He says, they say, why do you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts? When he did mighty works and mighty things among them, did they not let the people go that they might depart? So you see how this works. God did something that eventually resulted in Pharaoh hardening his heart. But Pharaoh was the one who actually hardened his own heart. So yes, you can say that God was the one who is responsible for what happened to Job, even though God didn't do it. It wasn't God's intention. It was not God's original plan. God did not take his best friend and hand him over to his worst enemy. This was God allowing it to happen. That's all you can say about Job. So yeah, please, don't let anyone else tell you that God started this whole thing. He didn't. Satan found Job. Satan figured out Job, realized, I can't afflict this guy. I can't afflict him because God's protecting him. So he thought, I'll use that to my advantage. And I'll go accuse Job's faithfulness and God's character. And the beautiful thing is, his plan failed. Job succeeded. That makes God, that vindicates God's character in front of the sons of God. So they don't question him anymore. If God had just kicked him out and said, get out of here, Satan, like he did in Zechariah 3, like he did with Moses in Jude chapter 1, verse 9, then that may have left the question open. I wonder if Satan touched a nerve. For the sons of God that we're watching, I wonder if Satan's onto something here. What if, see how God reacted? He just kicked Satan out. Man, maybe Satan figured something out, putting doubt in the minds of the sons of God. That could have happened. Satan already has other people who have fallen. He's already got other angels that have fallen. It makes perfect sense to me that this was another trick of his, trying to get more people to follow him instead of following God, and to put doubt in the hearts and minds of people and angels. And I think the sons of God were angels. You don't have to hold that view. You can. A lot of people think it was the descendants from the line of Seth that were the sons of God. I personally think it was angels. You don't have to hold. They don't have to be dogmatic about that. But look at Matthew 18. It says that Jesus mentions that the little ones, their angels behold the face of my Father. So angels are interacting with humanity, and they can see what's going on. Hebrews 12 says we are surrounded by a cloud of witnesses, so they're watching. Hebrews 13 says, be aware to be sure that you entertain strangers, because some of you have unknowingly entertained angels in doing so. So it makes sense to me that the angels were witnessing everything, and Satan was hoping to get more of them to fall by Job's failure. Thank God it failed, and eventually God showed up and made everything right with Job. He said, look, Job, you don't always know what's going on. You don't know how I laid the foundation of the earth. You don't know what happens in the oceans. All the stuff and the stars in the sky and the heavens, all those things. Like you can't draw out Leviathan with a hook, all those things. Look at Behemoth. You don't know how I put him together. You don't know. I did that. And he just basically affirms to Job, I'm God. I see you. I know what you're going through. You don't always understand everything, and you don't always need to understand everything. Just know that I'm here and I see you and I love you. So he comforts Job and he says, here's everything you've lost and then some. And Job even gets back another family. And you can go read the chapter 42. It's beautiful. It ends up, the story's got a happy ending. And I'm guessing we get to heaven, we're going to see angels that say their faith was strengthened by Job's example. So please keep that in mind if you guys are going through adversity yourself, that it's not just you, that other people out there, other even angels, these spirit creatures, they're watching as well. So it's not just you. So I hope that helps. Please don't let people say anymore that God wanted this whole thing to happen from scratch and it was his idea. That's not his idea to kill Job's family and destroy all of Job's stuff. That wasn't what happened. So anyway, hope that helps. See ya.